in a series, but it's been on mental health. And so this morning, if you're feeling like you're on the edge, maybe a lot of us from time to time, you feel like you just can't take anymore. It's to make life hit you from this direction and that direction, and you seem like you're teetering, pressure's mounting, you're not alone. And the one thing that I hope you've learned throughout this is you're never alone, right? I mean, even when we go through depression and loneliness and have all the thoughts and negativity that we deal with, that God is always there, that He's always present, He's always close. And the other thing that I hope you understand is you have a community of faith here. And that's why it's so important. I mean, it's, we're in a day and an age where people can sit at home and you can see and hear live any message pretty much in the country and podcasts and all of that. Can I tell you what? It is not the same as coming and praying and dedicating children and being in each other's lives and encouraging each other. There is no, that's what the church, that's what we as the church, that's what we're supposed to do, and it makes life so much easier. But according to a 2021 survey of most Americans, about a half of us feel like that we're burning out on the job. And again, that's just the job. You hear all these things going on with employers and employees, and it's hard to find workers. People are going remote because people are burning out. And that's just one part of life. So again, this morning we're going to be in 1 Kings chapter 19. We're going to look at an account that we looked at previous. We're going to talk about beating burnout this morning. And again, so I don't know about you, but I've really enjoyed this series. We have talked at first about myths of mental health, mental illness. There was a day when mental illness was looked upon like you're not a strong person. It wasn't looked on like if somebody was going through cancer or something like that, people would be like, what can we do? But with mental illness and anxiety and depression, it was always, well, just stop it. Just get over it. Think different. And so times are changing. And there's so many people that through this series especially, because I talked to a lot of people in the coffee shop where I hang out, and a lot of people they're on the verge of burnout, why we're going to end our series with this. But we've talked about anxiety and depression and negativity, and again, I will tell you that parts of that sermon has impacted me, and I hope they have you as well. So for me, my big takeaway right now, and God has gone overboard through other people stopping me in the middle of the coffee shop and praying with me and telling me that God told them to tell me this, is about unplugging and having quiet time. And so I've been practicing that, and there's a lot of things I can say sometimes that I'm practicing what I preach. This is one. And so in the mornings I get my coffee, I don't turn on the TV, I don't really care about the weather, and I have been doing some devotions and just sitting there in quietness. And I will tell you that the start of my day has been a whole lot better. I find, starting that out. And so I hope through this series there has been some takeaways, maybe some encouragement to know that you're not alone. That again, we've gone through some things, and I'm not the expert when it comes to mental illness by any means. I have gained a lot of information. Again, I am on the board of directors of Heritage in Decatur, and I've talked to lots of people, so I have access to a lot of clinicians and all of that. And so what I want you to see is also that it's okay to talk to somebody. So if you're sitting here going, I really think through all of this, I know what God's Word says and it's true, but I just need to sit and talk. I need somebody to walk me through some things. There's some wonderful Christian counselors, and I would definitely say Christian counselor because they apply God's Word as well. So again, burnout is generally, and I wrote a lot of these things down, it's a reflection of our inability to balance everything that hits us. Okay, so we have anxiety. Remember, anxiety are those thoughts, and we just keep thinking, and thoughts that would never come. It's based upon fear a lot of times. And if we let anxiety go on, it leads to depression, where we really just don't feel like, doing a whole lot, and it changes our attitude and how we deal with people. And then there's burnout, where you've hit a wall, right? Probably you've said it before. I can't take anything else. One little thing throws you completely over. But there's so many things that we struggle with, right? Think about everything that we juggle now. There's social pressure. I mean, with the advent of the internet, I mean, there's people portraying or wanting to portray that life is great. We have to live up to whatever the expectations are of our friends on Facebook. Right? Facebook is good and bad like a lot of things. So there's social pressures. There's lots of financial pressures. Right? I mean, it's hard. I think I saw somewhere that the average American's disposable income has decreased over 40%. I mean, everything is more expensive. The cost of college, and what are you going to do? How are you going to get your kids through college? And then the pressure of when your parents age. We're living in America where Americans are aging, and so taking care of aging parents, kids activities, trying to all of these things. You're trying to get our kids. We want to be the good parents, and you go here and you're going there. You have your job. You have societal pressures. It just causes suddenly at some point you just can't do it anymore. And so burnout hits. There's, and then on top of all of those things, you have health issues. You have stressful work environments, and then you have spiritual guilt. Right? You ever been there? That you just maybe look at yourself, maybe you look at others, and you're like, man, I'm just not as far along the journey with God as what they are. So sometimes in your own mind, and you bring that on because God's not putting pressure, right? I mean, to make us feel bad with condemnation. He wants us to always be progressing and being more of a follower of His. But there is that. Not living up to your own expectations. That's one I deal with a lot. How many of you have high expectations? And some of us, maybe they're too unrealistic. And so you can't live up to those. And that causes this undue stress that's put on us. And again, I feel like that it's still looked upon with all of these that we're supposed to just be able to balance these things. We're supposed to just go through life and just be okay and not have breakdowns, not have times where we just, we have anxiety, we have negativity. We're just supposed to figure out on our own somehow how to do this. And again, people, if you break your arm, what do people want to do? They want to sign your cast. But if you're telling people that you're going through and again, I found this out, like mental illness or whatever that is, it makes people uncomfortable. Because I've been talking a lot about this to a lot of people, and honestly, it makes pastors more uncomfortable than everybody else, and I don't know why. At least I feel like it does. Because when you talk about what you're going through, and I have been open and honest that I really do go through anxiety and have been through the time where I had the panic attacks in my 30s where I just couldn't function. I'll be honest. You remember, I couldn't be in crowds. I went to an Illini game one time. I couldn't stay. It just freaked me out. I've gone through all the anxiety, some of the depression. And so, I feel like that God doesn't put things on us, but He allows us to take those and use those to help other people. And so again, I've been open and honest about my own struggles. And again, for me, this has been great because putting all of this together, and a lot of it is a reminder of God's faithfulness and what He says. And this morning, we're going to look at the prophet Elijah and all of these great men and women of God that we look at and we go, wow, they must have been special people. But I will tell you, they were human. Right? We looked at the Apostle Paul, and I think, I think we look at him and go, man, he was just an amazing guy. Look at everything he did. And we forget the fact that he wrote, I was beaten 5 times, I was shipwrecked, I almost died, I was bitten by, all of these things. And we think he didn't go through trauma, but he did. Right? God helped him through that. And so what I want you to see is just because we struggle with anxiety or depression, or sometimes we have traumatic events that we're still dealing with, doesn't mean we're a bad person or a bad follower of Jesus. It just means we're human. There should be some comfort in that. It means we're human. It means at the fall, we all know what happened at the fall, right? Everything fell apart. Every system was broke. Brokenness came into the world. But I will tell you that Jesus came and His death on the cross for our sins was the most part so we could be reconciled to a holy God, but also so that you and I can get up tomorrow morning and face what we face. It's the presence of God. We're going to talk about that. That's one of my points this morning. I'll give it to you early, is that some of us just need a tangible touch from the presence of God. It changes everything.
Yes.
You guys are quiet this morning. So I'm going to define real quick the difference between stress and burnout. Most of us have almost all felt stress, right? Here's the definition. It's up here. Stress is generally short-lived and related to a temporary project or event. So you guys got a test coming up, you're stressed, right? Especially if you haven't studied. Maybe you didn't study as much and you show up on Tuesday, or a pop quiz. How many love those? Right? No, Jacob's shaking his head because he's got a couple of professors. Hey, we're having a pop quiz. Stress. Right? Temporary project or event. Blue jean ball, stress. I'm not so sure it's not chronic stress because you work on this for a while. But it's all temporary and it's related to an event, a presentation coming up. Here's burnout. It's chronic stress that feels never ending. So again, it's not just, okay, so once the test is over, you're not stressful. Well, you may not be stressful until you get the grade. And then maybe the grade's not what you want, right? But that sort of stress. So the blue jean ball goes away another year. Thank God, right? We wouldn't want to keep in this ongoing fundraising type of thing, event. So it goes away and the stress goes with it. But burnout's different. It's chronic. It's this and that and my job and my kids. It's to the point that it's overwhelming. And you feel like there's no relief in sight. You feel numb. You feel hopeless. I've been there. Probably most of us, maybe you didn't diagnose it at the time, but we've all probably been there at some point in time. When we just couldn't take anymore. It was chronic. And again, all of these things don't mean that you're a bad person. It just means you're human. It just means life happens. And it just means we need to be reminded how good our God is. And one thing that I've enjoyed throughout this series is how God created our minds. And if you ever want to study, look into that. I mean, Paul talks about we need to watch what we think. Why? Because our minds are so incredibly powerful. They are. And so learned a lot of things throughout that as well. We're going to look again at the guy named Elijah. We looked at him early on. But he's a classic example of burnout, right? You know the story, maybe not. Elijah comes on the scene with a king named King Ahab, who's a really bad, evil king. And he tells him it's not going to rain for a number of years. That's the first thing he says. And so throughout all of this, God does amazing things through this prophet of God, right? He ends up, he tells him this, and it doesn't rain until Elijah speaks. He ends up going to a widow's house, and he prays over her oil and her grain, and it's multiplied. The son dies, and Elijah throws himself on the body. The body comes back. The boy comes back to life. So God does all of these amazing things, and not to mention the prophets of Baal. Remember that? Remember how cool that was? They're all the false prophets are cutting themselves. They had altars sit there, and they waiting for the first one that could get their God to consume the altar. Their sacrifice, and they're cutting themselves in hours and hours, and Elijah's sitting laughing, and he's taunting them, and he simply says, God, show them that you are the one true God. And they had poured water and saturated the sacrifice and fire from heaven. How cool would that be? I mean, think about this. Elijah saw all of this. God did all of these things through. These are big things, right? I mean, calling fire from heaven, I'm praying for someone to come back to life, that's pretty big. Right? So imagine somebody's dead at the hospital, Dave, and you pray for them. They come back to life. Wow! This is where Elijah is. Until one day, an upset, irritated woman, and again, that's not could have been a man in this particular instance. It was Jezebel, right? She's mad and irritated and upset, and she makes this right. Let's read it if you're in 1 Kings. Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, and he had killed all the prophets, and with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say this: May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like one of them. So she's threatening to kill him. Elijah was afraid. He ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and he prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord. He said, take my life, and I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the bush and he fell asleep. Again, Elijah saw the protection of God. He saw all the great things that God did through him and for him. But let me stop right there. How many of us have done the same thing? Okay, I have never prayed for someone to come back to life. But God has done amazing things in my life and yours. Sometimes we forget that. So one thing happens, and if you remember all of these things that he's gone through, suddenly, Jezebel makes a threat. Now, she can't even back up the threat. Now, Ahab could, right? He did kill people. She never did. She just made the threat. And he got afraid. He hit the wall. I can't do this anymore, God. I can't take this. I can't take anymore. He runs for his life. He sits under a bush and he says, I should just die. A lot of us, maybe not the die part, but a lot of us, I'm done, God. I can't do it anymore. I've been hurt. I can't be hurt one more time. I can't take anything else. And that's what he's going through here. And we all get that, right? One of Satan's greatest tools is fear. And we've talked about that. Right? And who knows what in his mind. I mean, Satan twists things and he takes things. And then probably Elijah began thinking about all of those things. And the thinking led to the anxiety and the depression. And now he's burnt out. He simply just can't go any further. I'm going to look at verse 4 again. It says, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, he came to a bush and he sat under it and he prayed that he might die. He said, Lord, take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. He gives up. How many of you, when life throws all of those things, the first thing we want to do is sleep, right? We want to isolate from people. We can't do it. We look at ourselves and what maybe we were confident, but we're not anymore. We question everything. So stress and burnout, what's it do to us? We're going to look at three things really quick that it's stress and burnout, how it manifests in our life. And the first one is a physical manifestation. So being stressed physically hurts your body, changes your body. What's the first thing that it does, right? So you're stressed out, you have lots of anxiety, maybe you're borderline burnout, you're zapped. You just don't have energy. You just want to sleep. Right? One of the things I've joked around, because I do deal with the anxiety and stuff, I'm like, I am so busy, I'm too busy to be, to think about a lot of these things. But you get fatigued. It's hard to sleep at night. Been there. Haven't been there as of late for a while, but I've been there where I was months and I could not sleep, and it's horrible. Some of you have been there. I mean, I remember once getting out of my car at home, I went in, and the car was still running. I didn't even know it. It scared me. I mean, because, you don't think right. I mean, our bodies are designed for sleep and to relax. And then when all of that happens, what do we do a lot of times? We're not feeling well. There's no energy. We're depressed. We want to sleep. Then we want to self-medicate. Now, some people self-medicate with alcohol. Some people self-medicate with drugs. But some people self-medicate with food. I mean, there's a lot of things that we prescribe. We self-medicate an unhealthy lifestyle. So the second one is mental health. Mental health manifestation. So stress and all of those things. And so this is the part, there's two things that happen in the brain, and I talked about that. The first thing that happens is our amygdala, and I say amygdala. It's a psychological term that it enlarges. And what that is, it's how we process emotions. That's what that little part does. And the second thing is the prefrontal cortex tends to weaken. Why am I going through this? Because it's important to know physiologically when we're stressed and burnt out that there's parts of our brain that are affected. And so the prefrontal cortex regulates actions, emotions, everything, right? Our intellect. It regulates how we problem solve and our confidence and how we interact. So when that has problems, guess what happens? We're not confident anymore. You ever known anybody that they were super confident and made decisions and they had a traumatic event? Maybe they were in some depression, maybe they were facing burnout, and they could make a decision to save their life because their brain was affected. See, this is amazing. The more you get into it, the more God talks about it, the more Paul reminds us to watch what we think. Don't be negative. To watch what we're putting into our minds, because that's what we become. And so the more negative we are and all of it weakens this prefrontal cortex. And so that amygdala is a little almond-shaped part of our brain that God gives us that alarms us when there's overload. And so our brain is working, right? And so stress and burnout causes there to be a problem there that you and I aren't processing normally. And so that's why it's so difficult and important for leaders especially to not get burned out. Leaders can't lead when they're burnt out. You don't care, right? I mean, you can't take anymore. I can't make, and I said this, I don't want to make one more decision. Anybody that's ever leading anything say that? I'm tired. I don't want one more thing to go on. I don't want to just make the decision. I don't know that I care. It's the parts of our brain that's the fight or flight. And when we're constantly stressed, we're more vulnerable to fear. We're more vulnerable to all of those, oh, what if this happens? What if that happens? We're more vulnerable to just shutting down. I'm going home. I didn't want to get up today. Type of things. And again, it hits people at different ages. It hits young people. It hits older people. I mean, this whole burnout thing, we go so many ways in so many directions, and all it takes sometimes is one event that just upsets the apple cart. And then it's like, I'm done. There's so many pressures out there. And the last one's emotional issues. You may not feel motivated. You may feel like you're a failure. Especially, remember, if some of those pressures are you're not living up to your own expectations. See, that's not great. And again, I find myself there. I'm always way harder on myself than any evaluation I get. I don't know how you guys are. I'm like, and all of that just, it causes all of these things. You begin blaming God. You begin disconnecting from God. You begin blaming Him, and nobody understands the pressure. I've said that before. Have you ever said that? Nobody understands what I'm going through. I can't take this any longer. So, how do we get to the burnout stage? What leads us up to that? So, the nice thing about it is we're going to go through three things, and I want you to look in your life. We can stop it if we know what leads up to it, right? Before it gets to that point. Burnout is hard to come back from. Sometimes it takes a while. And we've all either maybe borderline been there, or maybe some of us have just flat out been there and said, maybe it's a job. I'm burnt out. I can't do it. I can't make another decision. I can't take the pressure of what they're asking me to do. And so Elijah made some mistakes within the text we read, and you and I probably make the same one. So let's look at three things really quick in how to know that we're leading up to burnout. Number one is we run ourselves in the ground. We're always on the go. We run ourselves in the ground. In verse 3 of the text we read, it said that Elijah ran. And what you remember, Elijah was in Jerusalem. I probably mispronounced that. So he leaves there and he runs to Beersheba. And that's where he goes. And it's almost a 100-mile journey. So when he left, he just ran. He was scared. How many of us just run all the time? Probably a lot of us. College students, I mean, you go to college and what, I know Jacob's going through that, some of you guys are too. You get a job because you got to pay some bills. You want to get through college without debt. Then there's that pressure. I don't want debt, so how am I going to get through there? What should I major in? How do I know if I'm going to get a good job? All of these things, right? We're so busy going and doing and having the clubs. And high school is the same way, right? You want to be in the right club. You want to be in sports. You want to juggle your grades. You got the pressure of thinking I have to have a certain amount of grades to get into the college I want. We're going like this. And if we don't watch it, it can lead us to burnout. It's like, I don't want to do this anymore. I just can't do this anymore. Saw some interesting statistics, even about pastors, and I've known about this for a while. I used to talk to I was a chaplain at the police department. I used to talk to cops, and I'd always tell them that one of the two highest stress jobs, one was teachers are high up there, but police officers and pastors. And they just looked at me like, "Are you kidding me? All you guys just work on Sunday and drink coffee in the coffee shop." Well, some of us drink coffee in the coffee shop. But point is, I read some statistics that said 75% of pastors are extremely stressed out, and 40% right now are facing burnout. At one point, and I think it's probably still true, the pastors are dropping left and right all across America because of the things that I've talked about. The expectations put on them and on all of the other things. And I will tell you, for me, it's weird because my stress comes on my day job. Right? Well, sometimes night job as well, it just depends. But the shelter, there's a lot of stress in running a small not-for-profit in these day and ages. But here I don't feel the burnout and stress. I almost feel like it's an addition. I love coming down here. You can tell Crystal, I love coming down. I like hanging out. I like the interaction and all of this. So it doesn't cause me that. But the other job is extremely stressful for me. So number 2 is we try to do everything ourselves. How many of you are guilty? Right? It's just easier. I'm just going to do it myself. And we have all these things we're doing. Instead of delegating, right? Instead of saying, okay, remember, I think somebody said, it was John Maxwell that said if somebody does something 70% as good as you, let them do it. And you go on to something else. Right? Why? Because you can't do everything. You have these high expectations and you want all of this done and you're doing it yourself. Why do pastors burn out? Because of that. They don't delegate. When I came down, one of the things I said, I'm not supposed to do all the work and I'm not going to. It's not what you want me to do. I empower you to go out and reach your friends and do all of that. That's why you don't burn out. Right? But we can't do it ourselves. And kids, that's one thing you're going to learn. You can't do everything yourself. You can't go and talk to enough people and do everything. You learn as a leader to be a good delegator. You just trust people and you invest in them. Elijah made that mistake. And the third one is we tend to dwell on the negative, and we talked about that before. Elijah could have looked back at his life and went, man, look what God did. Look how he used me. Look at his faithfulness. Look how he protected me. But he dwelled on the negativity of one person's opinion that said, I want to kill you. But how many times do we do the same thing, right? We're going through in life, everything's good, and suddenly somebody doesn't like us. And sometimes it derails us, right? And so we can't dwell on the negative. We just can't do any of that. We can start comparing everybody else's life to our life. We look at them and go, I wish I was them. And all of these things together cause us to look at life and go, I just can't do it anymore. I can't take it anymore. And I've talked a long time. That is the bad thing about this series, I'll be honest. There's just so much stuff to cover. Verse 7, let me get that real fast. It says, the angel of the Lord came back a second time and he touched him and he said, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. Sometimes the best thing that we can do is get a touch from the presence of God. I'm going to put that in there. Life is hard. We need God's presence. We need to be alone with Him. We need to feel His presence here at church, but we also need to feel it in our everyday lives. A tangible touch from the presence of God. And again, one of the most spiritual things you can do, I'm learning this, is to rest. Why is it so hard? Anybody but me find hard to rest? I can be on vacation and my mind's engaged on what I need to do or what's not going right or how much money I need to raise. Why is that? Jesus talks about He rested. He modeled that. God modeled resting for us. Jesus at different times would sail away by Himself to get away from the crowds. He would take time, right? Why is it so hard for us? Maybe that's one thing we need to take away from this is we just need to rest. We need to disengage. We need to go somewhere we can just be with us and God in quietness and enjoy His presence. You ever done that? You ever just go somewhere, you're by yourself, and you're in the stillness and the quietness, because remember Elijah, remember God tells him later